Hello, this is Lora O'Brien from the Morrigan Academy, and this is an excerpt from a new workshop that I've just been recording for the Morrigan Academy. It's called Five Devotional Practices and does what it says on the tin. It's a nice, simple workshop for people to start or refresh or deepen a practice with regard to a relationship with the Irish goddess Morrigan. So we're going to look at creating an altar and whether it's actually Irish and just have part of that as part of the discussion. So we're talking about really your sacred space. Altar is a term that is thrown around, but it is a tiny sacred space that you have designated for devotional practice. Now, in the workshop, we go into what devotion is and make the point that you don't have to be specifically dedicated to the Morrigan to start some kind of simple devotional practice. So we explore all that through this workshop. I'll put a link to it below or in the notes. So you'll be able to pick it up if you want to. But we are talking about just a tiny little designated area of sacred space. So, whatever you call it, this altar or sacred space provides a focal point for your devotion. It does not have to be big or fancy. I've seen everything from just the corner of a window ledge with a crow feather on it to a quiet spot in a garden or on a balcony or a shelf that's up out of the reach of kids and cats and maybe nosy neighbors or something like that. That's fine too, depending on your own circumstance, depending on what you want. I've also seen people who have an entire room dedicated to a temple, and that is also a sacred space with multiple altars all around. So it's really up to yourself, whatever you're having yourself, it's grand, right? So, how to start? You would choose a space and, if suitable, cover it with cloth. So, black, red, white, or grey are colours associated with the Morrigan. And these are very much her traditional colours with regard to the evidence that we have from mythology, from the lore. Red and white, in particular, are colours that are associated, excuse me, with the Irish otherworld, which she is very associated with, and black and grey are colours of the birds that are most closely associated with her, which would be corvids or particularly the hooded or scald crow here in Ireland. So all of that is relevant. And again, a cloth you could paint the window ledge white, and that'll do it. You could have a red shelf. You could have just a small piece of paper, which was underneath whatever else you were putting on it, and that could be your so-called cloth. Okay. And then you can add items like crow or corvid feathers. Now, do make sure that you check the legality wherever you are in the world with regard to collecting feathers. May or may not be appropriate, but if you have access, then that would be an appropriate thing to have as a focal point within the sacred space, but also any kind of imagery that's going to be relevant to you. So things like swords, spears, particularly, are associated with the Morrigan, or animal imagery. So we have wolf, an eel, and a cow. And all of that is going to be relevant for the Morrigan. I would stay away personally from that sexy, you know, Morrigan imagery, statuary, all of that, where she is very much being portrayed with regard to the male gaze and this sultry temptress of a goddess. That's not the Morrigan. Make sure that you check out the resources at the Morrigan Academy and you will start to actually get to know her as she is. Sex is not a bad thing, it's not a problem, but it's just not particularly relevant for this goddess. So when you have some kind of place designated or set up, you can light a candle if that's appropriate. You can also use battery candles, that's fine, or incense. Any kind of smoke cleansing or offering is good when you're connecting with her. And you can refresh offerings like water or wine regularly. Now, I will get into all of this a lot more deeply in the workshop, obviously, what kind of offerings, how to do them, what's traditional in Ireland, all of that is covered there. Okay. But the point here for today is to spend even a small amount of time in this sacred space as your devotional and try and do it most days. It doesn't have to be every single day, but most days. So, setting up this devotional space is important, but also then is actually using it and showing up there. So that's really important. Now, with regard to altars in the Irish tradition specifically, we do have a strong tradition through our monuments of what's called Druid altars, which are a couple of boulders with a big slab of rock across the top. And within our culture, these have been named as Druid altars, but actually, archaeologically speaking, they're not. They probably wouldn't have been used as an altar in the way that we would think of it. And that theory has been pretty well discounted, archaeologically speaking, which is grand. But the idea of a personal shrine or an altar within your home, within your family, is a global, like it really is. Every country, every culture has some form of this. And when we look at Ireland in particular, while we don't have a lot of pagan reference for that kind of personal altar, because our history records the big stuff, and not usually the common or vernacular traditions. But what we do have is an existing tradition which has carried through, which is the Sacred Heart in the home, which would be an image of Jesus, certainly, but often would have a shelf underneath it, would have maybe a picture of a departed loved one. So it's almost the function of an ancestral shrine, and offerings would be made at this altar, both for relevant seasonal offerings, but also then for more personal offerings, such as on the birthday or anniversary of the dead person. So all of these would be very common in Irish homes to this day. Really, this is part of our living traditions. So the idea of a personal altar or a little sacred space designated within the home is very much a part of Irish culture, Irish heritage, Irish tradition here in Ireland. So I hope that's been useful for you. Make sure that you check out the links below for more resources from the Morrigan Academy, and I will see you next time. Slán.